There's something deeply unsettling about apartment number 12, a place where tenants come and go faster than seasons change. Rumors swirl among neighbors, whispers of unexplainable occurrences, missing persons, and lives shattered within its walls. But for those who step inside, one warning echoes louder than any. Follow the rules, or you won't survive. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of decaying leaves as Emily Harper clutched her suitcase tightly. She stood before the towering brick building of Greystone Heights, her new home, or what she hoped would be a fresh start. The apartment was a steal, cheap, fully furnished, and within walking distance of her new job. She didn't question her luck, at least not until she saw the door to apartment number 12. The brass numbers hung crookedly, and the door seemed to lean slightly, as if it bore the weight of something invisible. A sense of unease settled over her, but she shook it off. "It's just an apartment," she whispered to herself, unlocking the door. Inside, the space was surprisingly cozy. Wooden floors gleamed, sunlight spilled through sheer curtains, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. A neatly folded note sat on the kitchen counter, pinned beneath a small iron figurine shaped like a key. Curious, Emily unfolded the paper. "Rules for apartment 12. Lock the door behind you immediately. Do not leave it unlocked for any reason. Never look out the window after midnight. If you hear a tapping, ignore it. If the lights flicker, do not move. Wait until they stabilize. Do not use the elevator at 3:33 a.m. If you find a red key in your apartment, hide it in the freezer. Never use it. Should you hear footsteps outside your door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., do not investigate. Under no circumstances should you speak to the man in the mirror." Emily laughed nervously. Was this a joke? A welcome prank for new tenants? Yet the tone of the rules unsettled her. Too precise, too specific to dismiss. She decided to humor them, locking the door and tucking the note into a drawer. That night, as she unpacked, the apartment seemed to breathe around her. Floorboards creaked softly, shadows danced across the walls, and the faint hum of the building's radiator seemed almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Still, she convinced herself it was nothing more than her imagination running wild. Around midnight, Emily curled up on the couch with a mug of tea. The clock struck 12, and a chilling breeze swept through the room, making her shiver. She glanced toward the window, where the curtains fluttered gently. Tap, tap, tap. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound was faint, deliberate, like someone or something was testing her resolve. She recalled the second rule: never look out the window after midnight. A part of her, rebellious and curious, wanted to peek, but something deeper, primal, kept her frozen in place. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like nails scraping against the glass. She clenched her fists, squeezing her eyes shut, and muttered under her breath, "It's not real. It's not real." After what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped. When she opened her eyes, the room was eerily silent, save for the ticking of the clock. She decided then and there to follow every rule on that list, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. The next morning, Emily explored her new neighborhood. She stopped by the corner coffee shop, where she overheard two baristas chatting. "Did you hear about the last guy in 12? One whispered. "Yeah," the other replied, lowering her voice. "Found him in the elevator. Said he was muttering about a red key before he..." "Chill." The first barista glanced around nervously before noticing Emily. The two fell silent, plastering on fake smiles as they handed her coffee. The exchange left her rattled, but she pushed the unease aside. That evening, Emily decided to make herself at home. She cooked dinner, played some music, and even started a journal. But as the hours crept by, the apartment began to change. The air grew heavy, the shadows longer. At 10 p.m., the lights flickered. Her heart leaped into her throat as she froze mid-step. For what felt like minutes, the room alternated between light and darkness, each flicker revealing something unnerving. A shadow in the corner that wasn't there before, a reflection in the window that didn't match her movements. When the light stabilized, she was alone again, but the sense of being watched lingered. Later that night, she found the red key. It was lying in the middle of the kitchen floor, impossibly bright against the dark wood. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, its surface cold and smooth. The weight of the key felt wrong, as if it carried something sinister. Remembering the rule, she hurried to the freezer, burying the key beneath a bag of frozen peas. Just as she closed the freezer door, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway. Emily froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. The steps were slow, deliberate, drawing closer. She checked the time, 2:47 a.m. Her mind raced. Rule 6, do not investigate. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. She held her breath, heart hammering as a shadow seeped beneath the crack. And then a voice, low and gravelly, whispered, "Emily." Her blood ran cold. She backed away from the door, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she couldn't. Something rooted her to the spot. The next few moments blurred together. The shadow under the door shifted, the voice whispering unintelligible words. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence returned, oppressive and deafening. Emily collapsed onto the couch, shaking as the first rays of dawn broke through the window. She knew one thing for certain. Whatever haunted apartment number 12 wasn't going to let her leave so easily. As the first rays of sunlight poured into apartment number 12, Emily Harper sat motionless on the couch. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the night before. She felt as though the apartment had come alive, its walls pressing in on her, its rules a sinister contract she had no choice but to obey. By the time she gathered the courage to move, the city outside had fully awakened. The faint hum of life, honking cars, distant chatter, seeped into the room, offering a fleeting sense of normalcy. She glanced toward the freezer, where the red key lay buried beneath frozen peas and ice packs. Its existence gnawed at her thoughts, a vivid reminder of the rules she could not afford to break. Later that morning, Emily decided to confront her growing unease. She took out her phone and searched for any information about Greystone Heights and apartment number 12. The results were sparse, almost suspiciously so. A few old forum threads mentioned odd occurrences, tenants moving out abruptly, strange noises, and bizarre sightings. One post stood out. Thread, what's up with apartment 12? User, lost in the walls. If you're reading this and you live there, get out. The rules are real. I didn't believe them until it was too late. The man in the mirror. He's not just in the mirror. You want something? Don't let him in. Don't. The post ended abruptly, leaving Emily with more questions than answers. She scrolled further, but the thread had been locked, its replies deleted. That evening, Emily prepared for another long night. She double-checked every lock, closed the curtains tightly, and ensured the red key remained untouched in the freezer. Despite her precautions, a sense of dread weighed heavily on her chest. At exactly 11:58 p.m., the lights began to flicker. This time, the pattern felt deliberate, 3 flashes, a pause, then 3 more. Emily stayed rooted to the spot, remembering the third rule, do not move. Her phone buzzed on the table, the sudden noise making her flinch. The screen lit up with a notification, an incoming video call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. The screen showed only darkness at first, accompanied by faint static. Then, a voice crackled through the speakers. You broke a rule, Emily. Her stomach dropped. What? No, I didn't, she stammered. The voice ignored her protest. You're being watched. Look to your left. Heart pounding, Emily turned her head slowly. At first, she saw nothing but the dimly lit kitchen. But then, in the reflection of the oven door, she saw it, a figure standing behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. The call ended abruptly, leaving her shaking with fear. She rushed to the list of rules, rereading them frantically. None of them mentioned answering calls, but the warning felt real. Something or someone was testing her. The elevator at 3:33 a.m. Emily dozed off despite her fear, exhaustion overriding her vigilance. She woke with a start to the sound of a soft chime. Her phone displayed the time, 3:32 a.m. Another chime echoed, this time louder. It was the elevator, its doors opening and closing on her floor. Emily's breath hitched. Rule for blared in her mind. Do not use the elevator at 3:33 a.m. She tiptoed to the peephole and peered outside. The hallway was empty, but the elevator doors remained open, revealing nothing but a dark void inside. The clock struck 3:33. A voice echoed from the elevator. Emily, come down. Her blood ran cold. She backed away from the door, clutching her phone like a lifeline. The voice grew more insistent, louder, until it sounded like it was right outside her door. Come down. Suddenly, the footsteps from the previous night returned, racing down the hallway toward her apartment. The doorknob rattled violently as the voice boomed. Open the door, Emily. She curled into a corner, tears streaming down her face, until the noise stopped as abruptly as it started. The silence that followed was deafening, oppressive, as though the apartment itself held its breath. When she dared to look through the peephole again, the hallway was empty, save for a faint smear of red on the elevator doors. The man in the mirror. The following morning, Emily's fear reached a boiling point. She decided to confide in anyone about what was happening. She called her friend Sarah, begging her to come over. By noon, Sarah arrived, her cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to Emily's haunted expression. You look like you haven't slept in days, Sarah said, concern etching her face. Emily recounted everything: the rules, the red key, the voice, and the figure in the reflection. Sarah, ever the skeptic, dismissed most of it. You're just stressed. Maybe you read too many horror stories before moving in. No, Sarah, it's real, Emily insisted, dragging her to the bathroom mirror. Just watch. They stood in silence, staring at their reflections. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light above the sink flickered, and the reflection of Emily's face twisted into a grotesque grin. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward. The reflection laughed, a guttural, otherworldly sound, before returning to normal. Get out of here, Emily urged, shoving Sarah toward the door. Sarah hesitated. What about you? I can't leave. Not yet. As Sarah fled the apartment, Emily sank to the floor, her resolve hardening. She needed answers about the rules, the red key, and the dark force that seemed to be closing in on her. But as night fell once again, she realized one chilling truth. The apartment didn't want her to leave. The morning after Sarah's visit, Emily awoke with a pounding headache and a chilling realization. She wasn't alone. Something in the apartment had shifted, a palpable presence that made the air feel heavy, oppressive. Every creak of the floor, every faint whisper of wind, felt deliberate, as though the walls themselves were alive. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the freezer. The red key's existence gnawed at her thoughts. She had hidden it, as the rules instructed, but its weight lingered in her mind like a ticking time bomb. Why me? She whispered. Her voice barely carried over the eerie silence of the room. A soft knock on the door made her jump. When she peered through the peephole, she saw a man standing in the hallway. He wore a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows, but something about him felt off. His posture was too rigid, his movements too still. Miss Harper, he called, his voice smooth and unsettling. I'm here to talk about the key. Emily's heart raced. How does he know about the key? She backed away from the door, her hands trembling. The man knocked again, harder this time. You have something that doesn't belong to you. Give it to me, and this will all end. Her mind reeled. Could he be telling the truth? Would handing over the key end this nightmare? But then she remembered the rules. Never use the red key. The knocking stopped. When Emily looked through the peephole again, the hallway was empty. But something was wrong. The elevator at the end of the hall stood open, its interior shrouded in darkness. She swore she saw movement, shadows flickering just beyond the light. She slammed the deadbolt into place and backed away, her chest heaving. Stick to the rules, she muttered like a mantra. Stick to the rules. The rules break. As the day stretched on, Emily tried to distract herself. She scrubbed the apartment clean, rearranged furniture, and flipped through old magazines left in the closet. But no matter how hard she tried, her thoughts kept circling back to the key. Around dusk, the lights flickered again. This time, It wasn't just a brief pulse. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. Emily froze, remembering the third rule, do not move. Wait until they stabilize. Seconds stretched into minutes. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she stood rooted in place. Then, in the suffocating blackness, she heard it, a faint scraping sound like nails dragging across wood. It started in the kitchen and moved closer. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Her breath hitched. She wanted to run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and everything was still. Nothing was out of place, except for the freezer door. It was ajar. Emily approached it cautiously. When she opened the door, the red key was gone. A chill ran down her spine. She searched the apartment frantically, but the key was nowhere to be found. As panic set in, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You've broken the rules. Prepare for what comes next. The elevator. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the elevator chimed again. This time, the sound was louder, more insistent. Emily curled up on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife, her only defense against whatever was coming for her. The elevator door opened and closed repeatedly, the sound echoing down the hall. Then, heavy footsteps began to approach her door. Emily's phone buzzed with another text. It's here. Let it in. Her chest tightened. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to drown out the noise, but the footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a low growl. Suddenly, the doorknob began to turn. The deadbolt rattled as if someone or something was trying to force its way inside. Emily screamed, pressing her back against the door. Go away! The rattling stopped, and the apartment fell silent once more. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. The key's purpose. At dawn, Emily received another text. Look in the mirror. Her stomach churned. She wanted to ignore it, but a morbid curiosity compelled her. Slowly, she approached the bathroom mirror. At first, her reflection looked normal, albeit pale and haggard. But then it changed. Her reflection smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far. The key unlocks more than doors, the reflection said. It unlocks truths. Use it, and you'll understand. Emily stumbled back, shaking her head. No, I'm not using it. The reflection tilted its head, its eyes darkening. You already broke the rules, Emily. The choice isn't yours anymore. The bathroom light flickered, and when it steadied, the mirror returned to normal. Emily's reflection was just her own again, but the words lingered. What did the key unlock? And why had it been taken? The whispering shadows. That evening, Emily noticed something strange about the apartment. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, pooling in corners and creeping along the walls. When she tried to focus on them, they shifted as though they were alive. The whispers started shortly after dusk, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but soon they grew louder. They weren't just random sounds, they were voices calling her name. Emily, Emily, come to us. She covered her ears, but the voices burrowed into her mind, relentless. Use the key, Emily. Free us. Free yourself. Emily screamed, her voice breaking through the oppressive noise. As the whispers faded, she realized something horrifying. The rules weren't just meant to protect her. They were meant to keep something else contained. By the next morning, Emily was barely holding herself together. Her once cozy apartment had become a prison, and she could no longer distinguish between reality and the horrors lurking in the shadows. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every flicker of light brought with it fresh terror. She knew one thing for certain. The rules were no longer her salvation. They were a warning she had already failed to heed. The stranger returns. As she sipped her lukewarm coffee, a knock came at the door. Emily froze, her pulse quickening. Peering through the peephole, she saw the same man from before, the one who had asked for the key. He stood motionless, his face obscured by the brim of a black hat. Miss Harper, he said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk? Emily hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore him, but desperation outweighed caution. She opened the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "The key," he replied simply. "You've lost it, haven't you?" Emily's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" The man smiled, a chilling expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Because the balance is already tipping. The key was your tether, the only thing keeping the apartment's secrets locked away." Before Emily could respond, he added, "If you want to survive, find the key. And whatever you do, don't let them use it." A descent into chaos. The moment the man left, the apartment began to change. The walls seemed to close in, their surfaces pulsing like living tissue. Shadows moved with purpose, darting across the room and whispering her name. Desperate for answers, Emily scoured every inch of the apartment for clues. She flipped through the drawers, searched behind furniture, and even tore open the freezer again, but the red key was gone. In her frenzy, she noticed something odd about the bedroom closet. Its door was slightly ajar, though she hadn't opened it. As she approached, a faint hum grew louder, resonating deep within her chest. Inside, she found a crumpled piece of paper covered in scrawled handwriting. It wasn't hers. The key's rules. It opens more than doors. It feeds on fear. Once found, it must remain hidden. If stolen, reclaim it before midnight. Failure to do so will break the seal. Emily's heart sank. Midnight was only hours away, and she had no idea where the key had gone or who had taken it. The entity unleashed. As night fell, the whispers grew louder, filling every corner of the apartment. They weren't just calling her name anymore. They were chanting something guttural and incomprehensible, a language that made her skin crawl. At exactly 11:57 p.m., the lights flickered violently. The apartment shook, picture frames falling from the walls and dishes shattering in the sink. Emily clung to the edge of the couch, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then the chanting stopped. A deep, resonant voice filled the silence, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The seal is broken." Emily screamed as the shadows coalesced in the center of the room, forming a towering, amorphous figure. Its body writhed like smoke, eyes glowing a sickly yellow. "You ignored the rules," it hissed, its voice like the scrape of metal on bone. "Now you belong to us." The figure lunged toward her, but before it could reach her, a bright light erupted from the bedroom closet. The entity recoiled, its form dissipating like ash in the wind. The keys returned. Emily stumbled toward the closet, drawn to the light. Inside, she found the red key, glowing faintly atop a pile of old photographs. She grabbed it, its cold surface biting into her palm. As soon as she touched the key, the apartment fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted, and the shadows retreated to their corners. But the relief was short-lived. A voice whispered in her ear, soft and menacing, "It's not over, Emily. You've only delayed the inevitable." The choice. Emily sank to the floor, clutching the key. She realized she had two options: follow the rules and keep the key hidden, or use it to unlock the secrets of apartment number 12. Her mind raced. The man's warning echoed in her thoughts. Don't let them use it. But the rules had already failed her. At precisely midnight, the key began to glow brighter, its surface pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Emily knew she had to act quickly. She could either bury the key and hope for the best, or use it to confront whatever force was haunting her. With trembling hands, she stood and approached the apartment door. The key seemed to hum in anticipation, its weight growing heavier. "This ends now," she whispered. She slid the key into the lock. Emily turned the red key slowly, its metallic surface warm under her trembling fingers. As it clicked into place, the apartment seemed to exhale, the walls groaning as if bracing for what was to come. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation and dread. The door creaked open, revealing not the familiar hallway, but a black void swirling with shadows and whispers. The voices were deafening, a chaotic symphony of pleas, laughter, and guttural growls. The key vibrated in her hand, urging her forward. The passage. Emily hesitated at the threshold, her instincts screaming to slam the door shut and retreat. But the pull was irresistible. an invisible force dragging her into the abyss. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. A single light flickered overhead, illuminating a long corridor with walls that seemed to pulse like living flesh. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. At the end of the corridor stood another door, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly. The whispers grew louder, forming words that echoed in her mind. Unlock the truth. Free us all. The room of memories. When Emily reached the door, she inserted the red key. The moment it turned, the corridor disappeared, replaced by a circular room filled with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of her life, her childhood, her parents, her regrets. But in every reflection, a shadow lingered, growing larger and closer with each passing moment. One mirror in particular drew her attention. It showed her sitting in apartment number 12, staring at the list of rules for the first time. Behind her, the shadow loomed, its glowing eyes fixed on her. The shadow in the mirror turned to face her. "You thought the rules were meant to protect you," it said, its voice deep and mocking. "They were meant to prepare you for this." Emily stumbled back, her reflection smiling cruelly as it stepped out of the mirror. The shadow coiled around it, merging into a grotesque, humanoid figure. "The bargain." The figure spoke, its voice resonating through the room. "The key is a conduit, a bridge between your world and ours. By turning it, you've opened the gate. Now, you must decide." Emily's voice cracked as she asked, "Decide what?" The figure grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You can seal the gate, but you'll remain trapped here forever. Or," it leaned closer, its breath cold against her face, "you can leave and let us cross over." Emily's mind raced. If she chose to stay, she could protect the world from whatever horrors lurked in this place. But if she left, she could escape this nightmare, at a cost she couldn't begin to fathom. The sacrifice. She clutched the red key tightly, its surface burning against her skin. "What happens if I stay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure laughed. "You become the guardian, bound to this place for eternity. But don't worry, you won't be alone." Shadows began to crawl toward her, their hands outstretched. Each one bore a face twisted in agony, remnants of past tenants who had made the same choice. Emily stepped back, her resolve crumbling. "And if I leave?" The figure's grin widened. "We take your world. A fair trade, don't you think?" The final choice. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she weighed her options. She thought of Sarah, the man in the hallway, and all the lives that would be destroyed if she let the shadows escape. With a trembling hand, she raised the key. "I won't let you win." The figure's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl. "You'll regret this." Emily turned the key counterclockwise, and the room erupted in light. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The mirrors shattered, shards flying through the air as the corridor reappeared. The aftermath. When Emily opened her eyes, she was back in apartment number 12. The red key lay in her hand, dull and lifeless. The apartment was silent, its oppressive aura lifted. But the rules were gone. As she stepped into the hallway, she found the building empty. Every door stood ajar, revealing apartments abandoned in a hurry. A single note was pinned to her door. "The key is yours now. Keep it safe. The cycle begins again." A new guardian. Emily never left apartment number 12. She became its silent protector, bound to its walls and the cursed key. And though she kept the door locked, she knew one day someone would move in, curious about the mysterious list of rules. And the cycle would begin anew.